Before we get into chapter 6, I want to go back and review the end of chapter 5, because that's another rule of context we should learn, that the preceding chapter will lead into the next chapter in either a very basic physical way, always a physical way, but sometimes a spiritual way. This one, very physical. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Well, what that indicates is when we see a change of nations or a change of power like this, we should see a change in the spiritual context or the spiritual flow of what's been happening. What we've been doing is we've been seeing how we can learn things, how God is trying to reach people. So we're going to see a little bit of change in that. And this is Daniel in the lion's den, so that's definitely, he's using a different process. Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. Now, when we look at two words like this repeated, and they have to do with something with the world, we know that just about which way it's headed. And it's Darius is still, he has his trust in the world too. And we can see by these key words, kingdom, administrators, high officials, he's putting his trust in his high officials, his administrators, and his empire, to where Babylon was putting their trust in what? The astrologers, the fortune tellers, and those kind of people. So we can see one movement, one shift right here. Then the other administrators and high officials began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful and always responsible and completely trustworthy. Three key words: faithful, responsible, trustworthy. One set. Administrators, high officials, government. Another set. Fault, criticism, condemn. Another set. So here we've got three sets of three key words. So that means pay attention. And that should explain pretty much the key lesson in this entire chapter. We've got a contrast here between faithful and criticize and fault. So be prepared to learn a lesson based on a contrast. So the administrators and high officials went to the king and said, "Look, long live the king, Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors in government." In other words, this is where Darius is putting his trust. All the people you trust, king, we're all in agreement. And the king should have a law that will be strictly enforced and give orders that the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human except for you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den. Now we got to look out, because this phrase is repeated. See repetition here. See it carried down here. And now we see law enforced and orders. Notice the keywords. So we can see where these administrators are putting their trust. They're putting their trust in making laws and enforcing them and giving orders. So, doesn't that kind of sound like today? So we can see we're moving closer to lessons that have a direct effect today. So let's skip down and look for the next set of matching words. This one doesn't set up, but this divine or human except for you. Divine or human except for you. It's a phrase repeated, so let's see what this adds. So they went straight to the king and reminded him about his law. Notice they call it his law. Did you not sign a law that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone divine or human except for you, your majesty, will be thrown into the lion's den? Yes, the king replied. That decision stands, and it is an official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked. Now, not only is this physical, but when we see something like this repeated, we know that it has a spiritual significance that, has something to do with us. I mean, how many laws have we seen that can't be changed, and, you can kind of concentrate and study on that on your own. Then they told the king, that man, so they referred to Daniel as a man now, one of the captives from Judah is ignoring you and your law, and he still prays to his God 3 times a day. You notice how this 3 times a day is praying? And what we're doing is we're using this law of context that tells us to look for 3 or more times when keywords are used in a sentence. It's pretty interesting. In the evening, the men, now they're men, they called Daniel a man, so Daniel calls them a man, went together to the king and said, Your Majesty, you know that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no law that the king signs can be changed. So you see this movement. The men went to the king, and the stone was brought, and the king returned. So pay attention to this movement when you're looking and trying to study this one. Basically, we have no law and law repeated here that's going to call our attention to this part of the story. Next part of the story has 3 words, then, early, and next morning, that draw our attention to it. And we know when we see words that are associated with time, it's pretty important. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night fasting. He refused his usual entertainment and couldn't sleep all that night. I highlighted night, a different color, because night could have a different spiritual meaning than just time. Very early the next morning, the king got up and hurried out to the lion's den. And of course, when he got there, he called out to Daniel, and now we see Daniel, O living God, was your God. We see, it took a trial. It took this whole night of anguish for Darius to start seeing what he needed to see. So now God is, instead of like Nebuchadnezzar, where Nebuchadnezzar had to endure, all that time out in the field and the dreams and all the other stuff, now he's using Daniel's trial to reach Darius. See a little change in how God changed the teaching pattern? Now look at, we got Daniel was one of the captives. Daniel was arrested. Daniel is a servant of the high living God. And Daniel serves faithfully, God. So we see these connections here, and we can see a spiritual movement in captives. He was a captive, Daniel was arrested, but he's a servant to the Most High God. We see a contrast here in the word servant. So we're beginning to see contrast and how God uses contrast more and more in His Word. My God sent His angel. Here we have movement. They went together to the king. They brought a stone that was placed over there. The king returned, but God sent His angel. All of these movements have a deep significance on who did the moving, where they were moving to. You look at all these details, and you can start pulling little details out of there. Here we see God sent His angel, and this is another form of communication here, where God was sending His angel. And we see we're talking about prayer up here. It's another form of communication. They were trying to shut off Daniel's form of communication with God. Look at this. God had another plan. God says, I can communicate a whole lot better than just prayer. I'm going to send an angel to shut the lion's mouth. Interesting, isn't it? Now here's King Darius. Once again, he sent this message to all the people. Here we go, nation, world. So he's now communicating with the world. Instead of dividing the world, now he's communicating with it. So we see another movement here. The word sent. Movement. Throughout. You know, that shows a movement and a location. I decree that everyone throughout my kingdom should tremble with fear before the God of Daniel. Now he's beginning to see, you know, there's a difference between all those other gods and Daniel's God. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. And his kingdom will never be destroyed, or his rule never end. Now, here's three words. God, living God, kingdom. And now we're beginning to go, wow, you know, these guys are finally getting it. He rescues and saves his people, and he performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Green, good words, rescue, saves, miraculous, signs and wonders. Again, miraculous, signs and wonders should probably be, you know, colored the same as dreams and everything else from previous chapters to be consistent. Heavens be colored gold with God. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So basically, what are we getting out of this lesson? Basically, we went to look back, saw the connection between chapter 5 and chapter 6. So we know it's a continuation. We saw a change in power, a change in nations in chapter 5, which told us there's going to be a change in the spiritual way of teaching. And we identified that spiritual way of teaching from Nebuchadnezzar having to endure trials to learn from, to Daniel had to endure a trial. But at the same time, that trial that Daniel was enduring, the king went through a sleepless night. So this night has, you know, a little bit of bearing of you know, man, he was in the middle of a battle himself, King Darius. And he couldn't sleep. You know, he couldn't find rest. He couldn't find comfort. You know, this sleep has a significant bearing on what we're closing this chapter with. Rescue, saves, miraculous. Here, rescued again, prospered. You know, sleep. If you look at it as spiritual. In the next verse, faithful, rescue. See, the Bible interprets itself. Here's faithful and rescue right here. So you can begin to see, here's another word. The king sealed the stone with his own royal seal and the seals of his nobles. See how this word seal, and we know seal has a deep spiritual meaning. It's related to some other stories in the Bible, but you got to look at who sealed it, you know, and why it's sealed and what it was physically sealing, and then you got to understand the physical. Then you can start to understand what this lion's den spiritually represents. So it's a little bit of work, but hopefully you're gathering a couple of these general rules of context, and you'll be able to apply them to your own studies. And of course, like I keep on saying, hopefully learn to teach other people. So there's these little words in here that aren't repeated, like sleep, that you have to pay attention to, just because, you know, you just don't concentrate on sentences or verses that have 3 or more, you know, key words, but look at all of them and pay attention, because sometimes the little words have some of the deepest meanings and will reveal the most valuable lessons to you.